Guys, today we'll talk about how to make a good Space Marine list better, how to spot potential weaknesses, and my thought process when I'm trying to make a list perform. Without further ado, let's dive right in. We'll be using an example of one of my Patreon subscribers' lists that he sent in the first day when he subscribed to my Patreon. He generously offered to be our guinea pig today, so thank you to Adam. Of course, if you want me to analyze your roster and make it better as well, take a look at my Patreon, links are in the description. He was asking me to analyze and maybe make better his Black Templars list that he was using at the time. It was September 2023, so very recent times. One interesting thing that I've immediately noticed about his list is that it is actually a very good list. So I'm often sent lists that have some very obvious mistakes, maybe mismatched units, units that don't really have a role in the list and it's quite apparent. I've seen a lot of that in tournaments where you look at someone's roster and you're like, what is this thing doing there? And then during the game you kind of realize that there is no real reason for this unit to be there and it's just there because perhaps the person wanted to add that into the list. And there's nothing bad in playing the units you like. I actually recommend to do it like that, but it's best when you combine your interest in the unit with an idea of how that unit is going to make you win the game. Adam here was actually doing a very good job following this rule. So his list has a lot of those check marks that I usually look at checked. So a quick recap on how to write a strong list in 40k. You can watch the video of the same name about that, but in general, first thing you need to worry about is making your list deadly. So you need to have enough things that actually do good job at killing things in your opponent's army in order to have a chance for it to perform. Next, you need to have some sort of speed, because in order to actually do damage, you usually need to cross some distance, either for just an engagement range in melee, or even with shooting, you need to get angles into your opponent. So if your army is critically slow, it'll be hard for you to actually do damage, even if your guns are capable of that. And out of that comes the next step, which is the ranged output. You need to have enough of ranged damage to be able to, even if you're a melee focused army, which is we're here obviously building a Black Templars list, so we should have a certain amount of good melee, still need to make sure that our shooting is capable of actually doing quite a lot of damage. Otherwise, our melee units will not make it into combat. And if you're playing against someone who knows how to do basic screening, it's going to be a big problem for you, because their big guns will be intact, shooting and destroying your assets, where you will be just crushing wave after wave into their chaff units that cost nothing. Taking a step back to just looking at 10th edition in general, that's my biggest gripe with the current edition of the rules, is the fact that we unfortunately don't have good buffs for our melee. We don't have any real incentive to be a melee army, because you can have extremely good damage from shooting, and shooting doesn't need to solve a problem of getting to your opponent and getting through screens. The only problem shooting needs to solve is essentially getting a line of sight onto the target. And that is easier, arguably, than getting both line of sight and just you physically into the midst of your opponent and into the engagement range. That is exactly why we're concentrating so much in my videos on shooting nowadays, because you need to be an extremely proficient player to be able to use a melee army against a well-prepared shooting or balanced army of your opponent. Yes, if your opponent doesn't really know what they're doing, that can be rather easy for you to overwhelm them, and then melee becomes this sort of scary thing that beginners really fear. But if you have been playing for a while and if you know how to actually protect yourself from melee, then the ball is on the side of the court of the melee player, where he or she needs to actually overcome those obstacles to do the damage. That's why I recommend to run balanced lists, because then you actually get to use both. You can use your skill ruins and just hide from one ruin to another, and then actually finally break through the defenses, maybe use some baits, use your cunning tactics to outwit your opponent and get your killy unit into their midst, or perhaps the speed of your unit as well. And you also have the shooting, which is a bit easier for you in terms of how you can use it. Last thing is a list needs to be able to take a punch. So sometimes on the board there will be situations where you need to survive a phase of shooting, or at least a part of the shooting phase of your opponent's army to actually get to where you want, or to score secondaries, or to capture an objective, something. You need to be able to hold your ground for a little while, and in order to do that you need to be able to take a punch. That is also the survivability of your shooting assets, but I'm mostly talking about melee things now. So what do we see in Adam's list? What can be done better and what is done well already? So we have Apothecary Biologist with Tannhauser's Bones. We have that 5+ Film Pain relic because Adam understands that survivability is key and it's something that you really need and you want to run because that's one of the best things in the detachment Righteous Crusaders. That's good. We also have High Marshal Halbert. Obviously don't mind the prices here. These are the prices for September 2023, so prices are currently a little bit different. Halbert is an incredible character, very, very good at buffing the unit that he leads, and if you use a lieutenant with him, he becomes an absolute blender of a unit. And we also have the Emperor's Champion, and as we can see, they are attached to 2 5-man Sword Brethren squads, each in their own impulsor. So that's good because Adam is thinking about durability there, he's thinking about the mobility of those 2 units, and giving them transports solves that problem somewhat. My first comment here would be the fact that impulsors, even though they are quite good at doing the transport thing, they are not providing by themselves enough mobility for your melee assets to be really happy with. So Land Raider in that sense is much better because he can move 12 inches and then disembark your unit and then you can charge. So that's 15 inches of threat range. The Impulsor can only carry your unit and then disembark it, but you cannot charge after that. So any kind of threat range that you're creating in that sense, you're only creating it for staging for the next turn. And it means your opponent will have time to react to what you're doing. I like the Impulsor combo when you are running Gladius because there, even if you're running it with Black Templars, because there you can have those 5-man squads in Impulsors, but they get extra d6 inches to their go turn. So they disembark 3, they move 6, that's 9 inches of threat range there already, plus obviously the charge you roll, so 12, and you also get the d6, which is going to change the mathematics considerably, and it's going to make it harder for your opponent to actually stay at a safe distance from those squads that are positioned in the Impulsors behind ruins. That's why I don't really like the idea of running Impulsors with Black Templars, which I have told Adam about. So we decided to change that. In the final list, you'll see we have solved that issue. Also, the Emperor's Champion as a leader for the Sword Brethren squad, I'm not sure I do like him that much because he's not giving pretty much anything to the squad he leads. He's not bad, it's just the fact that you are banking on him getting that +1 damage from the unit and he's not giving anything back to the unit, where for example a chaplain, if you attach him to the unit, he would also get damage 3 on his Croziers, but in addition to that he'll also give +1 to the unit itself, and that's what the Sword Brethren really need because they only are strength 5. So if you're running into tanks, for example, or monsters, wounding on 5s or even 6s is no fun. And remember, we are not running lieutenants here. We don't have the lethal hits unless we change the Val, which we don't want to do because we need Tannhauser's Bones for the 5+ Feel No Pain on our main unit. About that, so Apothecary Biologist with Tannhauser's Bones is obviously being attached to a 6-man unit of aggressors. Another thing I was a bit worried about here with his list, because aggressors, even though I really do like them, aggressors just walking on the board is not gonna do much, especially when they have flamers, so their effective threat range is 17 inches. That's very short, and you're not gonna get too far even with 5+ Feel No Pain. That is an interesting idea. However, I would much rather put those 5+ Feel No Pains on a chunkier unit, on something more important, something that has more wounds and therefore will get better efficiency from those bones. So what I would recommend for you to do with your list is look at what enhancements you're running and think about where they can actually be reattached in order to get you better efficiency. Don't use your best enhancement on a unit that is mediocre by itself. Aggressors are not mediocre, they just need a bit more sustainment, a bit more supplies in the sense of stratagems, a Land Raider to carry them to be actually as good as they are. We see two Black Templar Gladiator Lancers here. So Gladiator Lancer is a great choice on Adam's part because they are very good at actually killing the things that are usually good at killing the Sword Brethren, your Redemptors, and things like that. They kill the vehicles and monsters with good shooting from a distance. We also have two Redemptor Dreadnoughts. I really like these, even though now in the current meta in 2024 April, we have, because the C10s are now much more powerful and popular, we do have a lot of units which get those +1 modifiers to damage, +2 modifiers to damage with Melta, where that -1 damage that is actually protecting, doing most of the job protecting Redemptors is not as efficient. Though I think they're still very, very good units. And they actually do perform both functions of ranged output, have decent speed, they also are quite deadly, they can really take a punch. So we decided to keep them in the list until eventually we got rid of them in the most recent iterations of Redemptors, but that's a topic for another video. We also see two 5-man infiltrator squads, which I honestly think that's a bit of an overkill because yes, it's going to give you a lot of protection from dip strikes, but you're really investing a lot of points into that, where you can get a similar kind of support function for a lot less. Having one unit of infiltrators is a good idea if you can afford that in the list, but they're by no means a must-have. They're just a very good unit. I have played against infiltrators, I have played with infiltrators, and to be honest, I found all the time that they are a nice to have option, not a must-have option. And of course, Kaladas Assassin to do jump up and down secondaries, and 5-man Voidsman at Arms to stay on the home objective. And Adam's comments were essentially Redemptors and aggressors push into the midfield, so he's expecting the aggressors to do damage in the center of the board, where we've discussed why that may not be the best plan. But for Redemptors, it is a good plan. Sword Brethren with characters and impulsors are missiles for the mid-game, which I agree with that, but we discussed why impulsors might not be that good in this Black Templars detachment. And as you can see, it does cost quite a pretty penny, 610 points for the entire combo of two impulsors with the units inside. And Lancers at the back for fire support, Infiltrators, Assassin, and Voidsman to play missions. So he has all the check marks checked, but we do have some ideas on how to make things better here. And here's my enhanced version, something that we discussed with him for a few weeks and came to this list. So this is the list that I recommended him to run. It's a leaner version in terms of units, so we don't have so many different units. We still have the small unit on the home objective, which is a 4-man Inquisitorial Henchman unit, and this list is after the points corrections, so we are paying 130 for Inceptors, we are paying 65 for Scouts, so that's very, very recent points. The factor why we have slightly less units, but the idea is here, and here is what the idea is. We have Castellan, which you can make him a lieutenant. It doesn't really matter. I just like to use the Castellan for that, for thematic purposes. And we have High Marshal Helbrecht. And you can see that here we are building the infamous Helbrick, which is lieutenant plus Helbrecht inside a Redeemer. So this combo is, in my opinion, much, much nastier and deadlier than the impulsors with 5-man's units of Sword Brethren. Even though you're getting less activations, you're getting less individual units, but the killing power and the versatility of this combo I think is better. Because a 10-man Sword Brethren squad will be able to pick up anything pretty much in the game with the buffs that Helbrecht and Castellan give them. Get much better efficiency from Tannhauser's Bones because that's 30 wounds plus characters, 5 plus Film of Pain, which you first need to go through a whole Redeemer to get to, or you have already been charged with that unit. We still have 2 Gladiator Lancers. We now have an Inceptor squad, and I really highly recommend to run Inceptors now in any Space Marine list because the Inceptors are going to solve both problems of speed and ranged output for your Space Marine list, which we've discussed why that is important before. They can dip strike within 3 inches and shoot anything they don't like, and these guys in this case are the Bolter Inceptors, because when you're running just a 3-man unit, I would recommend, especially if you have other things to solve the tank problem with, which we do have here, I would recommend to run them as bolters because that's a more versatile combo. So we have something to dip strike into opponent's home lines, or perhaps to dip strike in front or right near opponent's transport to prevent them from disembarking, which is something that you can do as well. And we have the Land Raider Redeemer, 10-man primary Sword Brethren squad, 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, so we have the same combo of 2 Gladiators, 2 Redemptors. I didn't want to change the original list too much. We have 2 5-man Scout squad to do what the Kaladas was doing, but a bit cheaper and with 2 different units, because remember, we still want to keep the number of chaff units up. And before, Adam was spending a lot of points on the Infiltrators. We've saved up on that in order to get more stuff into the list, more killy stuff into the list. But we still needed 1 unit on the home objective and a couple of units to throw around and do secondaries. So that's why 2 5-man Scout squads and a 4-man Inquisitorial Henchman unit, because there's no real reason to run the Voidsman if you can save those 10 points. You have just a bit more, 20 points more. You can run a Mystic with this unit to have a sort of small Infiltrators unit where only the Mystic model is going to be preventing dip strikes within 12, but if you position him carefully, it's going to be enough for your purposes. Also, because we saved up points, we now have a Vindicator in the squad, and that's another way for you to deal with stuff at a distance before engaging them in combat. And as you can see, the list turned out to be quite a bit more shooting than the first one. So here's a side-by-side comparison so we can see better what changed. We've kept the 2 Gladiator Lancers, we've kept 2 Redemptors, so in that sense the list stayed the same. We kept the High Marshal Halberd, but he's now, instead of buffing just 1 5-man unit, he's buffing a whole 10-man unit of Sword Brethren, which are now riding in a Redeemer, which is arguably much more protected than 2 Impulsors. And by the way, the Impulsors on Adam's original list had the Bellicaros Missile Array instead of the Invulnerable Save, which we quickly thrown out, understanding that, of course, Invulnerable Save is much more important than just 1 missile shot. We've essentially traded the unit of Aggressors with Flamers into a Vindicator, which I think is a better unit to have, considering that we need more shooting to actually clean out the space for our Sword Brethren to plunge into. And we've saved up quite a lot of points on the Scouts, on the Infiltrators I should say, using the Scouts, and that's why we have an extra Inceptor squad here. Considering the changes to half damage and -1 damage modifiers that now a lot of units are ignoring the -1 damage, what I would probably recommend is to add a second unit, a melee unit with protection of 5+ Film Pain to this army instead of the Redemptors, potentially, because we do still have enough shooting here to deal with most threats. For example, we could run a Redeemer with Sword Brethren and a unit of 10 Terminators with 5+ Film Pain, or, which is cheaper and what you probably would be able to fit in here, is a unit of Grimaldus plus 20 Primaris Crusaders, where then you have 2 flanks essentially covered by your melee and then your shooting base in the back. All in all, what we did is we tried to maximize the damage that this list can do without sacrificing its mobility, its support capabilities. Essentially, the only thing that we really sacrificed, something that could be important, is the fact that we can split our Sword Brethren squads to go into 2 different directions. You can do that partially by splitting the unit inside the Land Raider into 2 5-man units, but don't do that if you're running 10 Houses Bones on them. Switch the 10 Houses Bones to a different unit like the 10-man Assault Terminator squad, and then run them as 2 5-mans inside the Land Raider, because that's still gonna give you those options to go one in one direction, another in a different direction, but with still efficiency of having a very, very durable 5+ Film Pain big unit in your army. So yes, we did not really sacrifice the killing power here, we actually enhanced it quite a bit, because the first unit would really struggle to take down something like a big, well-protected unit of Terminators, because even, 5-man unit with Helbrecht or 5-man unit with the Emperor's Champion, they are gonna take a big chunk of that unit, but they're not gonna do enough of that. And plus, also, it's gonna be much easier to avoid them, because the threat range of Impulsor plus the Sword Brethren is lower than the threat range of Land Raider, inside of which we have the Sword Brethren. These are the things that I usually look at when someone sends me their roster on Patreon, which you can also become this person by subscribing to my Patreon, and I will be able to provide you with a very thorough analysis of your list and my advice on how to make it work better. And just to reinforce the point, here is Adam's comment on my work, and he seems to be quite happy with the results, so hopefully you'll be happy with that as well. So thank you again to Adam for providing his list for review. Let me know in the comment section if you like this new format of list review. This is the first time I've done that on this channel, I think, and if you like it, I'm gonna do more of that. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.